My name is Jennifer Moore. I'm 34 years old, and I never thought my parents would call me heartless for protecting what I built with my own hands. You know that feeling when someone you love asks for something that feels completely wrong, but saying no makes you feel like the villain? That's exactly where I found myself when my parents thought they could move into my $1 million beach house, and then had the audacity to call me heartless for refusing. This isn't just about a house. This is about boundaries, respect, and the moment I realized that family doesn't mean you owe them everything you've worked for. Have you ever been put in a position where doing the right thing for yourself made you look like the bad person? Let me know in the comments, because what happened next will make you question everything about family loyalty. If you've ever struggled with setting boundaries with family, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because you're not alone in this battle. I'm sharing my raw, unfiltered story today, and I promise you'll see yourself in parts of it. The truth is, so many of us are taught that family comes first, no matter what. But what happens when putting family first means losing yourself completely? That's the question that haunted me for weeks after that phone call from my mother, Linda. Her voice was sweet at first, almost too sweet, like she was buttering me up for something big. I remember sitting on my balcony, watching the waves crash against the shore, thinking this was just another casual check-in call. But mothers always have that tone, don't they? That tone that says they're about to ask for something they know you won't want to give. The request came out so casually, like she was asking to borrow a cup of sugar. "Jennifer, honey, your father and I have been talking, and we think it would be wonderful if we could stay at your beach house for a while." A while. That phrase echoed in my mind like a warning siren. I knew my mother well enough to know that a while in her vocabulary could mean anything from 6 months to permanently. My father, Robert, had recently retired, and apparently, they wanted to enjoy their golden years by the ocean. It sounded reasonable on the surface, even sweet. But here's what they didn't mention in that first conversation. They weren't asking to visit. They were asking to move in. Completely. Fully. With all their belongings and their 2 dogs, and my mother's entire collection of vintage furniture. I felt my stomach drop as the realization hit me. This wasn't about a vacation or a temporary escape from their routine. This was about them seeing my success, my beautiful beach property, and thinking they deserved a piece of it simply because they were my parents. The house I bought wasn't just any property. I worked 80-hour weeks for 7 years as a software engineer, saved every penny, invested wisely, and finally bought my dream home overlooking the Pacific. It was my sanctuary, my achievement, my proof that I made it despite growing up in a family that never believed I would. And now, that same family wanted to plant their roots in the soil I had cultivated alone. But that's when things took a turn I never saw coming, because what they asked for next made their entitlement crystal clear. My mother continued talking, painting this picture of them hosting family gatherings at our beach house, redecorating the guest rooms to feel more like home, and maybe even adopting another dog since there's so much space. Our beach house. Those words stung like salt in a fresh wound. When did my house become our house? I built this life brick by brick, and suddenly they were making plans like they had ownership over my dreams. I tried to stay calm, to be respectful, to find the right words that wouldn't start World War III. "Mom, the house is actually under renovation right now," I said, which was true. I had contractors scheduled to start a major remodel in 2 months, but she brushed it off like it was nothing. "Oh, that's perfect. We can oversee the renovations for you since you're so busy with work." And just like that, my polite excuse became their justification to move in even sooner. Growing up, I was always taught that successful children take care of their parents. It's almost like an unspoken contract in many families, isn't it? You work hard, you achieve success, and then you're expected to open your wallet, your home, and your life to anyone in the family who needs it. The moment I bought that beach house, the dynamics in my family shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't just Jennifer anymore. I was Jennifer with the fancy job, Jennifer with the big house, Jennifer who clearly has more than enough to share. My younger brother, Marcus, still lived with our parents at 29, and nobody called him selfish. But me, the one who actually built something, I was expected to be everyone's safety net. Does this sound familiar to you? If it does, subscribe and like this video, because we need to talk about this toxic pattern that so many families normalize. The expectations weren't always spoken out loud, but they were there in every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every phone call. My Aunt Karen would make comments like, "Must be nice to have such a big house all to yourself. Some of us aren't so lucky." My cousin Dave would joke about me being the rich one, who should pay for family vacations since I could afford it. Even my grandmother got in on it, telling me that in her day, families stuck together and shared everything. The guilt was piled on thick, layer after layer, until I started to question whether my success was something to be proud of or something to be ashamed of. Why was I living in a beautiful home while my parents were still in their modest 3-bedroom house? Why did I get to enjoy ocean views while they watched the sunset from their backyard? The questions felt designed to make me feel guilty for winning. What nobody seemed to understand or care about was the sacrifice behind that success. They didn't see the years I spent working weekends while my friends were out enjoying their 20s. They didn't see the meals I skipped to save money, the vacations I never took, the relationships I lost because I was married to my career. They didn't see me crying in my car after brutal work days, wondering if all the sacrifice would ever pay off. They just saw the end result: a beach house, a nice car, financial stability, and in their minds, that meant I had an obligation to share it all. My mother even said once, "We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. Now it's your turn to take care of us." As if parenthood was an investment expecting guaranteed returns. As if my entire existence was meant to serve as their retirement plan. The pressure to be the good daughter was suffocating. Every time I tried to set a boundary, I was met with disappointment, guilt trips, or passive-aggressive comments about how I'd changed since getting money. My father would say things like, "I guess we're not good enough for your fancy lifestyle anymore." My mother would sigh dramatically and tell relatives that I was too busy to help family, painting me as this cold, distant daughter who forgot where she came from. The narrative they created made me the villain in a story where I was just trying to protect my peace. I started dreading phone calls from home because I knew each one would come with some kind of ask, some kind of expectation that I couldn't meet without losing a piece of myself. And the worst part? I started to believe their narrative. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was cold. Maybe I owed them more than I was giving. But here's what I learned through therapy and a lot of soul-searching. Generosity given under pressure isn't generosity at all. It's manipulation. It's control disguised as family love. When someone makes you feel guilty for having boundaries, they're not respecting you as an individual. They're seeing you as a resource to be used. My parents didn't call to ask how I was doing or celebrate my achievements. They called when they needed something, when my success could benefit them. And when I bought that beach house, the calls became more frequent. The asks became bigger, and the guilt became heavier. I realized that if I said yes to them moving in, it wouldn't stop there. Next would come Marcus needing a place to stay. Then Aunt Karen. Then cousins I barely knew. My home would become a family commune, and I would become the unpaid landlord of my own sanctuary. You won't believe what happened when I finally decided to stand my ground. The days following that phone call felt like I was drowning in quicksand. Every time I tried to think clearly about my decision to say no, another family member would reach out with their opinion. My brother Marcus texted me saying, "Mom and Dad really need this, Jen. Why are you being so difficult?" My Aunt Karen called to tell me how disappointed she was that I'd become one of those people who forgets their roots. Even my grandmother, who I adored, left me a voicemail saying she raised us better than this. The pressure wasn't coming from just one direction anymore. It was an orchestrated campaign, designed to break me down until I gave them what they wanted. Have you ever felt like you're the only sane person in a room full of people telling you you're crazy? If you have, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because you need to hear how this story unfolds and know that your feelings are valid, even when everyone around you says they're not. The guilt started to consume me in ways I didn't expect. I'd wake up at 3 a.m, my heart racing, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. What if my parents really did need help, and I was just being selfish? What if something happened to them, and my last memory was refusing them this one thing? The what-ifs played on repeat in my mind like a broken record. I'd go to work and couldn't concentrate because I was imagining my mother crying to her friends about her cold-hearted daughter. I'd come home to my beautiful beach house, and instead of feeling proud, I'd feel guilty for having something my parents didn't. The sanctuary I'd worked so hard to create had become a prison of shame. My therapist later told me, this is exactly how emotional manipulation works. It plants seeds of doubt so deep that you start to question your own reality. My mother ramped up her tactics when she realized I wasn't immediately saying yes. She started posting on Facebook about how hard retirement was, how they'd dreamed of living near the ocean their whole lives, how some children abandon their parents when they need them most. She never mentioned my name directly, but everyone knew who she was talking about. My phone blew up with messages from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all telling me I should reconsider, that family is everything, that I'd regret this decision. One cousin even sent me a long message about how her friend took in her parents and how beautiful and rewarding it was. The subtext was clear. Good children sacrifice for their parents, and I was failing the test. The court of public opinion had reached its verdict, and I was guilty. What made it even harder was that part of me wanted to be that good daughter they all imagined. I wanted to be generous and loving and selfless. I wanted to make my parents happy and proud. But every time I considered saying yes, I'd feel this weight in my chest, this knowing that I'd be betraying myself in a way I couldn't come back from. I knew that if I let them move in, my life would no longer be my own. My schedule would revolve around their needs. My space would be invaded. My boundaries would crumble. And worst of all, I knew it wouldn't be temporary. Once they were in, they'd never leave. My mother had already proven she was a master at making herself comfortable in other people's spaces. She'd stayed with my aunt for 2 weeks that turned into 8 months. This wasn't just about being nice. This was about survival. The turning point came when my father called me himself, which was rare. Robert was a man of few words, and when he spoke, it usually mattered. I thought maybe he'd be the voice of reason, the one who'd understand my position. Instead, he said something that still haunts me. Your mother and I sacrificed everything to give you opportunities, Jennifer. We went without so you could have. And now, when we ask for one thing, you can't find it in your heart to help us. That's not the daughter we raised. His words felt like a knife twisting in my gut. They'd reframed my entire childhood as a transaction, my success as a debt I owed. And the worst part was, for a moment, I believed them. For a moment, I reached for my phone to call them back and say yes. But then something inside me whispered, at what cost? At what cost to your peace, your sanity, your life? I knew I had to face them in person. This wasn't something I could handle over the phone anymore, where they could twist my words or hang up when they didn't like what I was saying. I drove the 3 hours to their house on a Saturday morning, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I'd practiced what I was going to say 100 times, but I knew the moment I saw my mother's disappointed face, all my rehearsed words would probably disappear. The house I grew up in looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling slightly on the shutters, the garden less maintained than it used to be. For a second, guilt washed over me again. Maybe they really did need a change. Maybe I was being cruel. But then I remembered what my therapist said. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation. My mother opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jennifer, what a surprise, she said, though her tone suggested it wasn't a surprise at all. She probably knew this confrontation was coming. My father sat in his usual armchair, newspaper in hand, barely looking up when I entered. The living room smelled like coffee and something baking, probably my mother's attempt to soften me up with nostalgia. We sat down, and the silence was thick enough to cut. I decided to just rip the Band-Aid off. I need to talk to you both about the beach house situation, I started, my voice steadier than I felt. I can't let you move in, and I need you to understand why. My mother's face immediately shifted from fake pleasantness to cold disappointment. Oh, here we go, she muttered. The big speech about boundaries and independence. The fact that she'd already dismissed what I was going to say before I even said it told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't going to be a conversation. This was going to be a battle. I pushed forward anyway. The house is going into major renovations starting in 6 weeks. I have a contractor lined up, blueprints approved, and a construction schedule that will make the place unlivable for at least 4 months. There's going to be dust, noise, parts of the house without running water or electricity. It's not suitable for anyone to live in, including me. I'll be staying with a friend during that time. This was all true. What I didn't mention was that even after the renovations were done, my answer would still be no. But I was giving them a factual reason they couldn't argue with, or so I thought. My father finally looked up from his paper. We can wait until the renovations are done, he said simply, as if that solved everything. That's not the point, Dad, I said, feeling my frustration rising. The point is that this is my home, my personal space, my sanctuary after working 60-hour weeks. I bought this house for me, not as a family investment property. The words came out harsher than I intended, but they needed to be said. My mother's eyes widened like I'd just slapped her. Listen to yourself, she said, her voice dripping with judgment. My home, my space, My sanctuary. What happened to family? What happened to helping the people who gave you everything? And there it was. The same guilt trip, wrapped in a slightly different package. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. You gave me a childhood and a foundation, and I'm grateful for that. But I don't owe you my adult life. I don't owe you access to everything I've built. That's not how healthy families work. The room exploded. My mother stood up, her face red with anger. Healthy families? You think you're so enlightened now with your therapy talk and your expensive lifestyle. We're not asking for your kidney, Jennifer. We're asking to stay in a house that has plenty of room. But apparently, we're not good enough for your fancy beach views. My father joined in, his voice raised for the first time in years. We sacrificed for you. We went without vacations, without new cars, without luxuries so you could go to that expensive college. And this is how you repay us? By calling us unhealthy? The accusations kept coming, each one designed to hit me where it hurt most. But something had shifted in me during those weeks of pressure. I wasn't the same Jennifer who would crumble under their disappointment. I'd spent too many therapy sessions unpacking their manipulation to fall for it again. I'm not doing this, I said, standing up. I came here to explain my decision respectfully, not to be attacked. My answer is no. I'm sorry if that disappoints you, but it's final. And then I did something I'd never done before. I walked out while they were still talking. The drive back to my beach house felt like an out-of-body experience. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. My heart was pounding, and part of me couldn't believe I'd actually walked out on my parents. But another part of me, a stronger part that I was just beginning to know, felt liberated. For the first time in my life, I'd chosen myself over their expectations, and the sky hadn't fallen. The world hadn't ended. I was still breathing, still driving, still intact. Within an hour of leaving their house, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Text messages from my mother calling me selfish and ungrateful. Voicemails from my father saying I'd regret this. Messages from Marcus saying I'd torn the family apart over a stupid house. If you've ever been the black sheep for simply protecting your boundaries, hit that subscribe button and smash that like, because what I'm about to share will validate every difficult choice you've ever made to choose yourself over toxic family dynamics. The accusations didn't stop. Over the next week, I received messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in decades, all weighing in on my terrible decision. My Uncle Tom called me spoiled and said I'd forgotten where I came from. My cousin Rachel posted vague messages on social media about family betrayal and people who get a little money and forget their roots. Even my mother's book club apparently discussed what a disappointment I was, according to a neighbor who felt the need to inform me. The campaign against me was relentless, organized, and designed to break my resolve. They thought if enough people told me I was wrong, I'd eventually cave and give them what they wanted. But here's what they didn't understand. I'd already made my decision, and I'd made it with a clear mind and professional guidance. No amount of public shaming would change that. What hurt the most wasn't the anger from extended family who barely knew me. It was my mother's final text message that week. I hope you're happy living in your castle while your parents suffer. When you're old and alone with no one to care for you, remember this moment. Remember that you chose a house over family. Those words were designed to plant fear, to make me imagine a future where my choices left me isolated and unloved. And I won't lie, they worked for a little while. I sat on my deck that evening, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and pink, and I felt utterly alone. Was this my future? Beautiful views, but no one to share them with because I'd pushed everyone away? Was my mother right that I'd prioritized material success over human connection? But then I remembered something my therapist had told me during one of our sessions. Jennifer, people who truly love you won't threaten to abandon you for having boundaries. That's not love. That's control. My mother's message wasn't coming from a place of hurt or love. It was a manipulation tactic, a final attempt to weaponize my fear of abandonment. Real family doesn't make you choose between your well-being and their approval. Real love doesn't come with conditions and price tags. The relationships worth keeping are the ones that respect your right to say no, that celebrate your success instead of resenting it, that want what's best for you even when it's not convenient for them. My parents had shown me repeatedly that their love came with strings attached, and those strings were choking the life out of me. I made a decision that night that changed everything. I replied to my mother's text with a simple message. I love you, but I will not be manipulated into giving up my boundaries. My home is mine, and that decision is final. When you're ready to have a respectful relationship that doesn't involve guilt and demands, I'm here. Until then, I need space. Then I blocked the family group chat, muted notifications from relatives I didn't have genuine relationships with, and gave myself permission to grieve, because that's what this was. Grief. I was mourning the family I wished I had, the parents who would celebrate my success instead of trying to exploit it, the unconditional love I'd always wanted, but never received. Accepting reality is painful, but it's also the first step toward freedom. And I was finally ready to be free, no matter what it cost me. You'd think that after making such a firm decision, I'd feel nothing but relief and confidence. But the truth is, the weeks following that confrontation were some of the hardest of my life. The silence from my family was deafening. No more calls, no more texts, no more guilt trips. Just nothing. And somehow, that nothing felt worse than all the accusations combined. I started questioning everything. Maybe I'd been too harsh. Maybe I should have explained better, or offered some kind of compromise. Maybe I'd just blown up my entire family over pride and stubbornness. The doubts didn't come all at once. They crept in slowly, during quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts, whispering that I'd made a terrible mistake. I found myself scrolling through old family photos on my phone, pictures from holidays and birthdays when things seemed simpler. There was my mother laughing at my college graduation, my father teaching me to ride a bike when I was 6, Marcus and me as kids, building sandcastles on a beach nowhere near as nice as the one I now called home. Had I really been willing to throw all of that away? The memories felt heavy with nostalgia and regret. I started imagining alternate versions of events where I'd said yes, where my parents moved in and everything worked out fine, where we all lived happily in my beach house like some kind of multi-generational sitcom. Maybe it wouldn't have been so bad. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe my therapist had gotten in my head and made me see manipulation where there was just normal family dynamics. The doubt became so overwhelming that I almost called my mother to apologize. I had my phone in my hand, her number pulled up, my finger hovering over the call button. What stopped me was a memory that suddenly surfaced, sharp and clear. I was 16, and I'd saved up money from my part-time job to buy a used car. I was so proud of that car, even though it was old and had a dent in the side. 2 weeks after I bought it, my mother asked to borrow it for a few errands. She kept it for 3 days, came back with an empty gas tank, and when I got upset, she told me I was being selfish and that family shares everything. That was the pattern, I realized. Every time I had something that was mine, it became ours. Every boundary I tried to set was labeled as selfishness. This wasn't new. This was who they'd always been. I called my best friend Marissa instead, and I'm so glad I did. Marissa had known me since college, had watched my relationship with my family from an outside perspective for over a decade. "Jen," she said after I poured out all my doubts and fears, "I've watched your parents treat you like an ATM for years. Every time you achieved something, they found a way to make it about what you owed them. Do you remember when you got your first big promotion and your mom's first reaction was to ask if you'd help pay for Marcus's rent? Or when you bought your car and your dad immediately needed to borrow $5,000? I did remember. I'd buried those memories under layers of guilt and obligation, but they were all there." Marissa continued, "You're not doubting your decision because it was wrong. You're doubting it because you've been conditioned to feel guilty every time you prioritize yourself." Her words hit me like cold water to the face. She was absolutely right. The doubt wasn't coming from genuine regret. It was coming from 34 years of conditioning that taught me my worth was tied to how much I could give to others. My parents had spent my entire life training me to feel guilty for having boundaries, and even though I'd intellectually understood that through therapy, the emotional programming ran deep. Breaking free from that kind of conditioning doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, conscious effort, and a lot of uncomfortable moments where you have to sit with the guilt and not react to it. I realized that every time I felt doubt, I needed to ask myself, is this doubt based on facts and healthy relationship dynamics, or is this doubt based on old programming and fear? The answer was almost always the latter. And slowly, very slowly, I started to trust my decision again. Then it took me hitting rock bottom emotionally to finally understand a truth that changed my entire perspective. Boundaries aren't walls that keep people out. They're bridges that allow healthy relationships to exist. For years, I'd seen boundaries as something selfish, something that proved I didn't care enough about my family. But the reality was the opposite. Without boundaries, I was drowning in resentment, exhaustion, and a constant feeling of being used. My therapist asked me a question during one of our sessions that I'll never forget. "Jennifer, If you keep giving pieces of yourself away until there's nothing left, who benefits? Not you, because you're empty, and not them, because they're learning that love means taking without reciprocity. That question shattered the false narrative I'd been living under my entire life. If this resonates with you, please subscribe and hit that like button, because understanding boundaries isn't just important. It's absolutely essential for your mental health and well-being, and I want to help you get there. I started reading everything I could about healthy family dynamics and boundaries. What I discovered was shocking. Healthy parents don't expect their adult children to fund their lifestyle or provide housing on demand. Healthy parents celebrate their children's success without making it about what they can get from it. Healthy parents respect the word no without punishment, guilt trips, or emotional manipulation. Everything I'd experienced with my parents was textbook enmeshment and financial abuse disguised as family obligation. The more I learned, the more I realized that my decision to refuse them wasn't mean or selfish. It was actually the healthiest thing I'd ever done. I was breaking a generational cycle of dysfunction, and that kind of change is never easy or comfortable. I made a list of what my life would look like if I'd said yes to my parents moving in. The list was eye-opening. I'd come home from work to find my mother rearranging my furniture and criticizing my decorating choices. I'd have to ask permission to have friends over because it was now their home too. I'd be cooking meals, cleaning up after them, managing their doctor appointments, and essentially becoming their caretaker while still working my demanding job. My dating life would be non-existent because what man wants to date a woman whose parents live with her and monitor her every move? My peace would be shattered. My sanctuary would become a source of stress. And worst of all, it would never be enough. They'd find new ways to need me, new demands to make, new boundaries to push. The house was never really about the house. It was about control. Understanding this brought a clarity I'd never experienced before. My worth as a daughter, as a person, as a human being, had nothing to do with how much I could give or sacrifice. I didn't owe my parents unlimited access to my resources simply because they'd raised me. Parenthood is a choice adults make, and children don't enter this world with debt already attached to their souls. Yes, honoring and respecting parents is important, but that honor should flow both ways. They needed to honor my autonomy, respect my decisions, and treat me like an adult capable of making choices about my own life. The relationship had been one-sided for so long that they'd forgotten I was a person with needs, not just a resource to be extracted from. The turning point wasn't just intellectual understanding. It was emotional acceptance. I gave myself permission to disappoint them. I gave myself permission to be called selfish. I gave myself permission to be the villain in their story if that's what it took to be the hero in my own. That permission was the most powerful gift I'd ever given myself. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't making decisions based on who would be upset or what people would think. I was making decisions based on what was healthy, sustainable, and aligned with the life I wanted to live. My beach house wasn't just a physical structure. It represented everything I'd overcome, everything I'd achieved, and everything I refused to let be taken from me. And protecting that wasn't selfish. It was survival. What happened next proved I'd made the right choice, even though it hurt like hell. 3 weeks after I'd blocked the family group chat and set firm boundaries, my mother found a way to reach me that I hadn't anticipated. She showed up at my workplace. I was in the middle of a team meeting when my assistant knocked on the conference room door with an uncomfortable look on her face. "Jennifer, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your mother and it's urgent." My stomach dropped. I excused myself from the meeting, my heart racing, trying to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. Linda stood in the reception area, and the moment I saw her face, I knew this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying, but her jaw was set with determination. She wasn't here to reconcile. She was here to make a scene. "How could you do this to us?" she said loudly enough that several coworkers turned to stare. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "Mom, this isn't the place. We can talk outside." I tried to guide her toward the door, but she planted her feet firmly. "No, I think your colleagues should know what kind of person you really are. Everyone here probably thinks you're so successful, so generous, so kind, but you're heartless, Jennifer. Absolutely heartless." The word hung in the air like poison. Heartless. That's what she'd decided I was. Not a woman with boundaries, not someone protecting her mental health. Heartless. I could feel tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of my coworkers who were watching this family drama unfold like a reality TV show. I managed to get her outside to the parking lot, where she continued her tirade without the audience. Your father and I are struggling, and you're living in luxury without a care in the world. We asked you for one thing, one simple thing, and you couldn't find it in your heart to help us. Do you know how that makes us look to our friends? How humiliating it is to admit that our own daughter, who has $1 million house, won't let us stay there. And there it was again, the focus on appearances, on what other people thought, on their embarrassment rather than genuine need. Mom, you're not struggling financially, I said as calmly as I could manage. Dad has a pension and Social Security. You own your home outright. You want to live at the beach, and that's fine, but it doesn't have to be my beach house. There are rentals, there are retirement communities, there are options. She looked at me like I'd suggested she live in a cardboard box. Rentals? You want us to spend our retirement money on rent when you have all that space sitting empty? That's your solution? You've become so cold, Jennifer. Money has changed you into someone I don't even recognize. The accusation stung because part of me still wanted her approval, still wanted to be seen as a good daughter. But a stronger part of me, the part that had been growing through therapy and self-reflection, knew this was manipulation. She was trying to reframe my boundary as a character flaw, my self-preservation as cruelty. I took a deep breath and said something I'd never said to her before. I'm sorry you feel that way, but my decision stands. You need to leave now, or I'll have to call security. The shock on her face was almost comical. No one had ever told Linda Moore to leave, especially not her own daughter. She stood there for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find words cutting enough to hurt me the way she was hurting. Finally, she said in a low, venomous voice, "You're going to regret this. When you're old and alone, when you need help, and there's no one there because you pushed everyone away, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that you chose material things over the people who loved you." Then she walked to her car, got in, and drove away. I stood in that parking lot for 10 minutes after she left, trying to pull myself together enough to go back inside and face my co-workers. The word heartless echoed in my mind over and over. Was I? Had I really become the cold, selfish person she'd described? The weeks after my mother's workplace ambush were the loneliest of my life. I'd go to work, come home to my beautiful beach house, and sit on my deck watching the waves, feeling completely isolated from everyone I'd once called family. The silence was suffocating. No birthday calls, no holiday plans, no random texts about nothing important. I'd been excommunicated, cut off completely for the crime of saying no. Some nights I'd pour a glass of wine and wonder if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. Maybe being heartless was better than being this alone. Maybe I should have just let them move in and dealt with the consequences. Have you ever felt so lonely that you questioned every boundary you'd ever set? If you're going through something similar right now, please subscribe and like this video, because I need you to know that loneliness is sometimes the price of freedom, and it doesn't last forever, even when it feels like it will. I started to understand that guilt and loneliness were weapons my family had used against me my entire life. Any time I'd tried to separate, to become my own person, to make decisions they didn't approve of, the punishment was always the same: withdrawal of love and connection. When I chose a college across the country instead of the local one my mother preferred, she didn't speak to me for 2 months. When I dated someone she didn't like in my 20s, she made every family gathering so uncomfortable that the relationship eventually fell apart. The pattern was clear: conform to their expectations or be cast out. And for most of my life, I'd conformed because the alternative, this crushing loneliness, felt unbearable. But now I was living in that alternative, and I had to decide if my freedom was worth the isolation. My friendship with Marissa became my lifeline during this time. She'd check in on me daily, come over with takeout when she knew I was struggling, and remind me that chosen family is often stronger than blood family. "Jen, look at what you're mourning," she said one evening as we sat on my deck. "You're not missing genuine connection or unconditional love. You're missing the familiar dysfunction. You're missing the role you played in their lives as the provider and the problem solver. But that role was killing you slowly. You're not lonely because you made a bad decision. You're lonely because you're grieving the family you wished you had, but never actually did." Her words cut through the fog of my guilt. She was right. I wasn't missing actual quality time with my parents. I was missing the idea of them, the fantasy of what parents should be. I started journaling every day, working through the complex emotions that came with choosing myself over family approval. I wrote about the anger I felt at being manipulated for so long. I wrote about the sadness of accepting that my parents might never understand or respect my boundaries. I wrote about the fear that maybe I was broken or defective for not being able to make these relationships work, but I also wrote about the peace I felt in my home now that it was truly mine, the relief of not having to justify my choices or manage someone else's emotions, the freedom of living according to my own values instead of constantly performing for an audience that would never be satisfied. The loneliness was real, but so was the liberation. And slowly, I started to believe that I could survive this grief and come out stronger on the other side. What surprised me most during this period was discovering who my real support system was. My coworker, David, who'd witnessed the parking lot scene with my mother, pulled me aside one day and shared that he'd gone through something similar with his own family. A neighbor I barely knew left a note on my door saying she'd overheard some of the drama and wanted me to know I wasn't alone. An old college friend I hadn't spoken to in years reached out after seeing my mother's vague social media posts and offered a listening ear. These people, some of them virtual strangers, showed me more genuine care and support than my own family ever had. I learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up for you, who respects you, who celebrates your success instead of resenting it. And once I opened my eyes to that truth, I realized I wasn't nearly as alone as I thought. I was just alone, in the way I'd feared most, without my parents' approval, and that was going to have to be okay. Months into this new reality of boundaries and distance from my family, I started to see my entire life through a different lens. I'd always prided myself on being self-sufficient, on not needing anyone's help to achieve my goals. I'd put myself through college, built my career from entry-level to senior engineer, saved and invested wisely, and bought my dream home without financial assistance from anyone. That self-sufficiency had been my armor, my proof that I was strong and capable. But I was beginning to understand that true self-sufficiency isn't just about financial independence. It's about emotional independence too. It's about being okay even when the people you love are disappointed in you. It's about trusting yourself more than you trust their opinions of you. For so long, I'd confused self-sufficiency with isolation. I thought needing emotional support was weakness, that asking for help meant I'd failed somehow. This mindset had been reinforced by my family, who saw my success as something that should benefit them, but never saw me as someone who might need support myself. When I'd share accomplishments with my mother, she'd immediately shift the conversation to how I could help Marcus with his job search or contribute to some family expense. My achievements were never celebrated for what they represented about my hard work and dedication. They were only valued for their utility to others, so I'd stopped sharing. I'd stopped being vulnerable. I'd become an island, emotionally isolated even before the physical isolation of cutting ties. Therapy helped me understand that self-sufficiency should include building healthy support systems, not rejecting all forms of connection. The strongest people aren't the ones who never need anyone. They're the ones who can discern between healthy relationships that add value to their lives and toxic relationships that drain them. I'd spent so much energy maintaining relationships with family members who didn't respect me that I'd neglected to invest in friendships and connections with people who actually valued me as a person, not as a resource. My beach house, which I'd bought as a symbol of my independence, had almost become a symbol of my isolation. I'd achieved the American dream of property ownership, but at the cost of human connection. Or so I thought. The reality was that I'd confused toxic family bonds with all forms of relationship. I started intentionally building community in ways I never had before. I joined a local book club and actually showed up instead of making excuses. I volunteered at a youth coding program on weekends, mentoring young women interested in technology. I hosted small dinner parties at my beach house, filling it with laughter and genuine friendship instead of obligation and resentment. What I discovered was beautiful. When you remove toxic relationships from your life, you create space for healthy ones to flourish. My home became what I'd always wanted it to be, a gathering place for people who lifted each other up instead of tearing each other down. The irony wasn't lost on me that my house was now filled with more love and warmth than it ever would have been if my parents had moved in. The most profound lesson I learned about self-sufficiency was this: protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's sacred. Every single person has a limited amount of emotional energy, and how you spend that energy determines the quality of your life. I'd been spending mine trying to fill bottomless wells of need in people who would never be satisfied, who would always want more, who saw my exhaustion as proof that I wasn't trying hard enough. When I redirected that energy toward myself, toward healing, toward building genuine relationships based on mutual respect, everything changed. I wasn't heartless for refusing to light myself on fire to keep others warm. I was finally learning what it meant to honor my own worth. And that worth wasn't determined by how much I could give or sacrifice. It was inherent, unchangeable, and mine to protect. The question I'd been asking myself for months, am I heartless, finally had an answer. No, I have a heart. I'm just finally using it to love myself too. About 6 months after I'd set my final boundaries with my parents, something unexpected happened. I stopped waiting for them to understand. For all those months, part of me had been holding out hope that they'd eventually come around, that they'd apologize and acknowledge that they'd been wrong to treat me the way they had. I kept imagining this movie moment where my mother would show up at my door with tears in her eyes, saying she finally understood why I'd needed to protect myself. But that moment never came. And one morning, I woke up and realized I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need their validation or their approval to know I'd made the right choice. That realization was more freeing than any apology could have been. The cycle of emotional dependency that had controlled me for 34 years was finally broken. I started to recognize how deeply that dependency had affected every area of my life. In my romantic relationships, I'd always chosen men who were emotionally unavailable or critical, unconsciously recreating the dynamic I had with my parents, where I was constantly trying to earn love that was always just out of reach. At work, I'd been a chronic people pleaser, taking on extra projects and staying late because I needed my boss's approval the way I'd always needed my mother's. Even my friendships had been unbalanced, with me always being the one who gave advice, provided support, and solved problems, but rarely asking for help myself. I'd been living my entire life as if love and belonging had to be earned through service and sacrifice. Breaking free from my parents' control meant I also had to break free from this pattern everywhere else. The process of unlearning emotional dependency wasn't linear or easy. There were days when I'd catch myself about to text my mother about something small, like a funny thing that happened at work or a new recipe I'd tried. The instinct to seek her validation was so deeply ingrained that it activated automatically. But then I'd remember how those conversations always went. She'd find a way to criticize or redirect the conversation to her own needs. I'd share good news, and she'd respond with bad news. I'd reach out for connection, and she'd use it as an opportunity to ask for something. So instead of texting her, I'd text Marissa, or post in my book club group chat or journal about it. I was slowly rewiring my brain to seek connection in places where it was actually reciprocated. What helped me most during this process was understanding the difference between healthy interdependence and unhealthy dependency. Healthy relationships involve two whole people choosing to share their lives while maintaining their individual identities. Unhealthy dependency involves one person sacrificing their identity, needs, and boundaries to maintain connection with someone who demands that sacrifice. My relationship with my parents had always been the latter. They didn't want me to be a whole, autonomous person. They wanted me to be an extension of them, a resource they could access whenever they needed. True love doesn't require you to shrink yourself or give up your boundaries. True love celebrates your wholeness and respects your autonomy. Once I understood that, I stopped trying to force my parents to love me the way I deserved, and started accepting that they might not be capable of it. The moment I truly broke free from emotional dependency came during a conversation with my therapist. She asked me, if your parents never change, if they go to their graves believing you're selfish and heartless, can you still be okay? The question terrified me at first. Could I really live the rest of my life knowing my parents thought I was a bad person? But as I sat with that question, I realized the answer was yes. Yes, I could be okay. Their opinion of me, as painful as it was, didn't have to define my reality. I knew the truth about who I was, someone who'd worked hard, achieved success, and learned to protect herself from people who would exploit her kindness. If they couldn't see that, it was their loss, not mine. That acceptance didn't mean the pain disappeared, but it meant the pain no longer controlled me. I was finally, truly free. A full year after I'd refused my parents' request to move into my beach house, I finally completed the renovations. The house was more beautiful than I'd ever imagined. Open-concept living spaces with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. A gourmet kitchen where I could actually cook without tripping over outdated appliances. And a master suite that felt like a spa retreat. As I walked through each room on the day the contractors finished, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pure, uncomplicated joy. There was no guilt attached to this achievement. No voice in my head saying I should share it, or that I didn't deserve it. Just pride in what I'd created, and peace in knowing I'd protected it. This house represented more than financial success now. It represented my journey to self-respect and the boundaries I'd fought so hard to maintain. I hosted a housewarming party and invited the people who'd actually supported me through the hardest year of my life: Marissa, my coworkers who'd become genuine friends, my book club members, my neighbors, and the young women I mentored through the coding program. As I looked around at all these people laughing and enjoying my home, I realized something profound. This was family. Not the family I'd been born into, but the family I'd chosen and built through mutual respect and genuine care. These people celebrated my success without resentment. They respected my boundaries without calling me selfish. They showed up for me in ways my blood relatives never had. The house was full of love, just not the love I'd once thought I needed. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. My brother Marcus reached out about 8 months after the big fallout. His message was short. "Hey Jen, can we talk?" I stared at that text for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to protect the peace I'd worked so hard to build. But another part of me, the part that still hoped for reconciliation on healthy terms, agreed to meet him for coffee. When we sat down, he looked uncomfortable, nervous even. "I owe you an apology," he started. "I didn't understand what Mom and Dad were asking of you until they started doing the same thing to me. Now that I have a decent job, suddenly they need financial help with everything. Every conversation is about what I can do for them. And I finally get it. You weren't being selfish. You were protecting yourself from people who see us as ATMs, not as their children." Marcus's apology opened a door I thought had been permanently closed. We talked for 3 hours that day, sharing experiences and realizing how differently our parents had treated us based on our success levels. When Marcus was struggling, they coddled him. When I was successful, they exploited me. It was a painful pattern to acknowledge, but naming it helped us both heal. We agreed to rebuild our sibling relationship independent of our parents, on our own terms. It wasn't the family reconciliation I'd once hoped for, but it was something real and healthy. And it taught me that sometimes boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal which relationships were built on genuine love and which were built on obligation and exploitation. The genuine ones survive. The exploitative ones don't. As for my parents, we eventually reached a civil but distant arrangement. After 2 years of silence, my mother sent a brief email acknowledging that perhaps they'd pushed too hard and asking if we could start fresh. I agreed to limited contact, monthly phone calls and major holiday visits, but with clear boundaries about topics we wouldn't discuss and requests I wouldn't entertain. It's not the warm, close relationship some people have with their parents, and I've had to grieve that loss, but it's honest, it's sustainable, and most importantly, it doesn't require me to sacrifice my well-being to maintain it. I learned that love without respect isn't really love at all, and I'd rather have respect with distance than closeness with disrespect. My beach house still stands as my sanctuary, my achievement, and my reminder that protecting your peace is never heartless. It's the most loving thing you can do for yourself. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized the greatest lesson wasn't about setting boundaries with my parents. It was about understanding that my worth was never up for negotiation. For most of my life, I'd operated under the belief that I had to earn my place in my family through achievement, through giving, through constant sacrifice. Every success was immediately followed by the question, what can I do for others with this? I got a raise, so I should help pay Marcus's bills. I bought a car, so I should lend it freely. I purchased a beach house, so I should open it to anyone who asked. My accomplishments were never truly mine. They belonged to a family system that viewed me as a collective resource, rather than an individual person with my own dreams and needs. The truth I finally accepted was painful but liberating. Some people will never see your worth because they're too busy calculating your usefulness. My parents didn't call to congratulate me when I got promoted. They called to ask what the salary increase was and how it could benefit the family. They didn't celebrate when I bought my beach house. They immediately started planning how they could move in. Every milestone in my life was reframed through the lens of what they could extract from it. And the saddest part? I'd enabled this for years by saying yes, by sacrificing my boundaries to avoid conflict, by believing that being a good daughter meant erasing myself. Breaking that cycle required me to accept a truth that society doesn't like to acknowledge. Sometimes the most toxic relationships in your life are with the people who raised you. I learned that family dysfunction doesn't excuse itself just because it's wrapped in love language. "We're family" became the justification for every boundary violation, every guilt trip, every manipulation tactic. But real family, healthy family, doesn't weaponize that connection. Real family doesn't make you choose between your well-being and their approval. Real family celebrates when you protect yourself, even if it means protecting yourself from them. The relationships worth keeping are the ones that can survive honesty, respect boundaries, and don't require you to shrink yourself to make others feel bigger. Everything else is just shared DNA and obligatory holiday visits. And once I understood that distinction, I stopped trying to force my parents into the real family category and accepted them for what they were. People I was related to who couldn't love me the way I needed to be loved. The most profound shift in my understanding came when I stopped asking, why don't they love me enough to respect me? And started asking, why did I love myself so little that I tolerated their disrespect? The problem was never that I was unlovable or that I wasn't giving enough. The problem was that I'd been taught my entire life that my value came from what I could provide to others, and I'd internalized that message so deeply that I'd betrayed myself repeatedly to maintain relationships that were slowly destroying me. My parents didn't create my low self-worth out of nowhere. They reinforced and exploited a belief system that society already teaches women, that our worth is in our service, our sacrifice, our willingness to put everyone else first. Breaking free from my parents meant breaking free from that lie entirely. What I wish I could tell my younger self, the Jennifer who cried in her car after brutal work days wondering if success would ever feel like enough, is this: you are enough exactly as you are. Your worth isn't determined by your bank account, your house, your achievements, or how much you can give to others. Your worth is inherent. You were born with it. And anyone who makes you feel like you have to earn their love or prove your value doesn't deserve access to you. The beach house wasn't the real achievement. Learning to protect my peace, set boundaries without guilt, and choose myself even when it cost me relationships was the real achievement. And that's something no one can ever take from me, no matter how many times they call me heartless, because I know the truth. Having a heart doesn't mean letting people break it over and over. It means loving yourself enough to say no. 2 years after everything fell apart, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my father, Robert, calling from a friend's phone because I'd blocked his number. "Jennifer, your mother is in the hospital," he said, and my heart dropped. Despite everything, despite all the pain and manipulation, she was still my mother, and the thought of losing her terrified me. "What happened? Is she okay?" I asked, already grabbing my keys. "She's fine," he said, his tone flat. "She had some chest pain, but it was just anxiety. The doctors are releasing her tomorrow." But this made me realize something. We're not getting any younger, and this distance between us is ridiculous. It's time to put this behind us. We'd like to come stay with you for a few weeks while your mother recovers. I stood frozen in my living room, keys in hand, feeling like I'd been transported back in time to the moment this all started. They were using a health scare, a moment of vulnerability, as leverage to get what they'd wanted all along. The manipulation was so blatant, so predictable, that I almost laughed, but mostly I felt sad. Sad that even now, even after years of distance and limited reconciliation, they still saw me as someone to be manipulated rather than respected. "Dad, I'm glad Mom is okay. Truly. But my answer is still no. You can't stay at my house, not for a few weeks, not for any amount of time. That boundary hasn't changed." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with disappointment and anger. I'd failed their test yet again. "So that's it?" he said, his voice hard. "Your mother has a health scare and you can't even put aside your selfishness for a few weeks to help us? What kind of daughter are you?" There it was. The same accusation, the same attempt to make me feel guilty for maintaining my boundaries. But this time it didn't work. This time, I felt nothing but clarity. "I'm the kind of daughter who loves herself enough not to be manipulated," I said calmly. "Mom's health scare was real, and I'm genuinely sorry she went through that. But using it as a reason I should let you move in is exactly why we have these boundaries in the first place. I hope she feels better soon." But my answer is no. I hung up before he could respond, before he could launch into another guilt trip or accusation. The hours after that phone call were interesting. I waited for the guilt to come, for the familiar weight of shame and self-doubt, but it never arrived. Instead, I felt something I'd rarely felt when dealing with my parents. Confident and clear. I'd made the right decision, and I knew it in my bones. I texted Marcus to let him know about Mom's hospital visit in case he hadn't heard, and his response confirmed what I already suspected. They tried the same thing with me last month, said they needed help after Dad's back injury. which turned out to be him sleeping wrong. It's always something. The pattern was so clear now that it would have been funny if it weren't so sad. They would keep trying, keep testing, keep looking for weak spots in our boundaries, and we would keep saying no. I realized that acceptance doesn't mean reconciliation, and peace doesn't require resolution. I'd spent years waiting for my parents to change, to understand, to apologize meaningfully and respect my boundaries. But they were who they were, and no amount of hoping would transform them into the parents I wished I had. The final confrontation wasn't dramatic or climactic. It was just another phone call, another manipulation attempt, another boundary held firm, and that was okay. I didn't need them to validate my choices or agree with my boundaries for those boundaries to be right. I didn't need their blessing to live my life on my own terms. The little girl inside me who desperately wanted their approval could finally rest, because the woman I'd become knew that self-approval was the only approval that mattered. My beach house stood as it always had, beautiful, peaceful, and mine, and I was finally completely at peace with that. So here we are, at the end of my story. Though really it's just the beginning of my real life, the life where I get to define what family means, where I get to protect my peace without apology, where I get to be enough exactly as I am. If you've listened to this whole story, thank you. Thank you for hearing me, for understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to love you healthily. After hearing my story, what would you have done in my place? What's your take on family boundaries and the expectation that success should be shared with everyone who claims a relationship with you? I genuinely want to know, because these conversations are how we heal collectively, how we break generational cycles, and how we give each other permission to choose ourselves. Do you believe that children owe their parents unlimited access to their resources simply because they were raised by them? Do you think there's ever a situation where saying no to family is the right choice, or should family always come first no matter the personal cost? These aren't easy questions, and there are no universal answers, but I do know this. Any relationship that requires you to consistently betray yourself to maintain isn't a relationship worth having. Love should add to your life, not subtract from it. Connection should energize you, not drain you. And family should celebrate your success, not exploit it. If the relationships in your life don't meet those criteria, you have permission to reassess, to create boundaries, and yes, even to walk away. My beach house is still standing, still beautiful, still my sanctuary. I host gatherings for my chosen family, mentor young women who remind me of my younger self, and wake up every morning grateful for the life I've built and protected. Are there moments when I miss having parents who love me unconditionally? Absolutely. The grief comes in waves, especially during holidays or life milestones when I see other people with supportive, healthy family dynamics. But I've learned that you can grieve what you never had while simultaneously celebrating what you've created. And what I've created, a life built on self-respect, authentic relationships, and unapologetic boundaries, is worth more than any fantasy of family reconciliation. If you want more stories like this, stories about breaking free from toxic family dynamics, setting boundaries without guilt, and building a life that's authentically yours, make sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Drop a comment below sharing your own experiences with family boundaries, or let me know what part of this story resonated most with you. Your story matters too, and this community is here to support you through it. Remember, you are not heartless for protecting your heart. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are not cruel for setting boundaries with people who refuse to respect them. You are strong, worthy, and deserving of relationships that honor your wholeness. Don't ever let anyone, family included, convince you otherwise. I'll see you in the next video, where I'll share more about how I rebuilt my life and found joy after cutting ties with toxic family members. Until then, protect your peace, trust your boundaries, and remember that you are always enough.